Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you. Pleased to be joined now by ESPN NFL analyst Dan Orlovsky, whose appearances on One Bills Live are presented by Caesars Sportsbook, an official mobile sports betting partner of the Buffalo Bills. And Dan Orlovsky is going to be taking in the Monday Night Football atmosphere here in Orchard Park next week because he is doing the game on ESPN, calling the game with his good friends and partners Louis Riddick and Chris Fowler. So, Dan, we will welcome you to Western New York with open arms early next week. But how does this game grab you at first blush? Because you look at the Bills, they are on a 7-game winning streak stretching back to last season in terms of regular season outings. And the Jags are the exact opposite. They've lost 7 in a row. They are struggling mightily. And we know how the NFL can turn on a dime, but still in all, the Jags are trying to find themselves right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big kind of expectation and storyline going into Monday night is, you know, we all know kind of what the statistics are for a team that starts the season 0-2 and certainly starts at 0-3. And I think the Jags are trying to find themselves a little bit, trying to find, you know, identity certainly on the offensive side of the football, both in like a schematic identity of kind of who they can be with the people that they have, and also maybe just like a personality identity or, you know, leadership identity. And then a little bit on their defense as well, like who's going to be that alpha personality. Oluokun, their linebacker, is a guy that's led the NFL in tackles before. You know, Josh Allen, the Jacksonville Josh Allen, still a really good pass rusher. So I think they're just trying to figure out, I mean, at the end of the day, it's trying to find a way to win a game that kind of minimizes that a little bit as well. It's a little bit of the contrast, you know, with Buffalo, so impressive with, I think they're very unapologetic, at least offensively, through 2 weeks of who they are now. And I think on defense, you know, you sit there and go, that's really like a scouting department performance and an organizational performance because, you know, if you take the 2022 Buffalo Bills defensive roster and you compare it to kind of what we've seen transpire over the first 2 weeks, you would go, oh my gosh, that defense has to stink with all the lost pieces. And I think it's, you know, like there's draft and develop. And it certainly seems that one group, one organization absolutely has done that. And one's trying to maybe find their way and find their footing on that.
Look, and Jacksonville, it's not like Jacksonville has fallen off the map. They've given up 20 points to the Dolphins and 18 points to the Browns, but they haven't been able to outscore either one of those teams on either of those first two Sundays. So certainly their defense, you know, has not fallen off a cliff, but their offense, even with Trevor Lawrence, a guy who most teams would say, yeah, give us that guy, you know, they still are struggling to score points.
Yeah, I think, Steve, so one, it kind of goes back to an identity of, I can, you know, like, here's why the identity offensively matters. Okay, so how we start games, you know, the first 15 snaps, your identity kind of shows itself in those moments. How do we get ourselves started well into this football game? You know, is it a formation identity, a personnel identity, how we want to try to attack defenses identity? Is it play action? Is it screens? Is it take shots? Like, there's not a consistency in that for them. Or it's, hey, we're not in rhythm. We're struggling. The defense right now is winning. You know, what are the things or the people that we can rely on to get going? I don't think Jacksonville has that right now. Or in those gotta-have-it moments. You know, it's late in the football game, and we need a person or a play or a route or a throw to make to give us our most confidence. Again, I don't think they have that right now, and I've loved Trevor. You know, Trevor is wildly talented, and he's had so many highs in his football career, both college and certainly in the NFL. And I like this offseason, like he was expected to take a jump this year. He really was. Last year, moments and then health, and you know, they're pretty talented to some of their skill position people, but they just haven't figured out how to get it all going together. And I don't think, if you just ask me, like, what is the, outside of the identity, the offensively, a main difference between these two teams is I really in my heart believe that Buffalo is trending towards having a top 10, top 8 offensive line. And I feel like Jacksonville is going the other direction when it comes to just how good the offensive line is.
Yeah, and you know that can obviously have a trickle-down effect on everything else. I mean, you look at Trevor, 51% completion through the first 2 games. He's been sacked 7 times. The sack percentage is 31st in the league. His passer rating's 82. And in his last 7 starts, all losses, by the way, 16 touchdowns, 15 picks. Like, I don't want to put it all on Trevor.
Sure.
And I thought going into the year they would be a solid running team to help maybe take some of the heat off of Trevor. And I like Bigsby and ETN as a combo. I fully expect them to come in here and try to run the ball to maybe take some of that heat off Trevor on Monday night.
Yeah, I agree. But both backs are really good, and I actually like when they run the football out of their 2 and 3 tight end packages. Week 1, ETN fumbles on the 1-yard line, or it's going to be 24-7. Jacksonville's game's over. So obviously that's a massive kind of singular moment that has tremendous impact on sitting there 0-2. The tough part is the dicey part will be this Monday. If they come in here and say, we're going to run the football specifically on early downs, and they're unsuccessful, because just let's be honest, Williams and Spector and Jones, they were really good on Monday night last week, or Thursday night, excuse me. You do not want either of those tackles single blocking Rousseau and or Vaughn right now. I think the way that Buffalo is handling Vaughn is really smart. I think Greg is really starting to show himself. Ed obviously had another big game. So it's going to be really interesting to watch how they handle Jacksonville offensively, some of those early downs, because if they get into those obvious situations, I do think that defensive line again, it's 2 weeks into the season, but I do think that defensive line is starting to kind of show itself when it gets to Ed, Epinesa, Greg, and Vaughn in some of those obvious pass situations.
So when you get to that point, and I know it's early and a lot of stuff happens, and we still don't know if Buffalo is kind of got an adrenaline shot from the backups coming into play, and whether they'll settle back in and maybe they're going to find a different level than they showed against the Dolphins. But if the Buffalo Bills defense shows up like it did, what does Jacksonville have if their offensive line has struggled? What does Jacksonville have that may be able to take advantage of some of the backups or some of the guys that may have shown out of the box really quick for Bills defense, but may not be there talent-wise or whatever coming down the stretch? I mean, what's Jacksonville looking at when they look at this Bills defense?
Yeah, Steve, I would simply say this. I don't know what Taryn's, forecast is for Monday night. I would say this. If you just took Taryn and you took, obviously, Milano, but now Terrell, like that second level of their defense, you're going to have to prove to me that you can handle a lot to look at. Like, you're going to have to prove to me that you can handle a different personnel, and I'm going to set a formation, then I'm going to shift a guy, and then I'm going to motion a guy, and you're going to have to prove to me that you can handle all that you have to look at. You got to get into the right communication of who's got to be where and leverage. I want to see if you can handle different action post-snap. Like, I would stress that unit a ton, and maybe it doesn't equal, big throws down the field, but I would make that group constantly think and constantly communicate with all those different looks. Now, Miami tried to, and credit them. I thought they tackled really well in space. I think that's one of the things defensively that's been very impressive about that unit. No matter who's been out there, they've tackled well in space, man, and that matters in today's NFL, where some teams are struggling a little bit in that regard. So that's how I would try to get after them. I think the secondary's played good football. I really do. I would try to go after that second level unit.
And speaking of that, Dan, I had a question for you just from your playing days perspective. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity, but, Trevor Lawrence and Buffalo's presumed starting middle linebacker, Balin Spector, were teammates at Clemson. I mean, they went against each other in practice year after year after year after year. How much of an advantage might that give Trevor, knowing what Balin Spector's strengths and maybe perceived weaknesses are, and how can he help maybe Coach Peterson in maybe trying to get him in, a situation that may not play to Spector's strengths?
Yeah, I don't think that there's anything that probably Trevor knows play-wise that's not obvious on tape. And there's not really a ton of tape on Balin.
Right.
So there's Some Trevor, what are you going to say? Man, he really struggles with, zone coverage. You're probably seeing that on tape if you felt that way, or he really, is a really aggressive player, so we can use misdirection to our strengths. But again, you're probably watching that on your own scouting reports. So I don't think that there's anything, because I've been on teams. I've gone from one team to another in division. I was down in Houston and I got cut at the end of camp and went to Indy. And I remember sitting there and they were like, hey, what do they like to do? And give us stuff on these guys. And I'd be like, man, they really want to run, towards the 3 techniques in this set. And they're like, yeah, we kind of know that. And, we're really, the back's going to read this type of block. And like, yeah, we know that. I'm like, man, this defensive tackle. And they're like, yeah. So there's a lot of smart football people, in the NFL. So I don't think that there's anything that's going to be that significant that can get shared.
What do you think, about this matchup and when you get into this game about Jacksonville, Buffalo? What will it take for Jacksonville to bust this huge slump there? I mean, they've lost 7 straight games going into last year, and I know this year's team is a different animal than last year's team that they ended the season with, just like Buffalo's is. But, man, oh, man, that's got to start to wear on the organization, even if it doesn't wear on the locker room.
Yeah, they hit some big plays in their pass game down the field in both games. Really, that's the only thing they did well versus Cleveland. Now, Cleveland – defensively, very good unit. But they hit some big throws down the field to their rookie wide receiver, Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. He's a really, really big-time player. They had 2 or 3 big-time throws down the field to Christian Kirk in week 1 that he dropped. So I think that, they're searching to try to create big plays on offense and create big chunks and explosive plays. And those are the 2 guys that it seems most comfortable and getting to. Gabe Davis, obviously you guys know him well, has not found footing there yet. Now that might be a guy, to your question of knowledge and whatnot, that might be a guy that you sit there and go, he probably has a little bit more intimate details of how defensively they might try to handle certain bunches or stacks or formations or motions, or, Rasul's really aggressive in these situations, or if I give him this, he might sit on it, and so we could take advantage of that. Or I think that's probably a guy that has a little bit more information, and Buffalo will have to be aware of that. But, they're really trying to find ways to push the ball downfield to kind of generate easy for their offense. They'll need to do that.
All right. And then I know you already mentioned Buffalo's offensive line, but, through 2 games, and I know it's a small sample, but Buffalo 57% run in their first 2 games, which is 5% higher than it was down the stretch under Brady when he was still the interim OC last year. Again, small sample size, but what do you make of that? And then where do you think that can take James Cook's production, knowing he was a 1,600 all-purpose yard guy last year?
I just think it's great discipline by Joe Brady. It's easy to say. It's easy to sit there and say, if teams are going to play us this way, we gotta kind of force the issue, and without becoming impatient. I watch it all the time in the NFL where, coaches, teams are playing in a 2-shell defense, or they're playing in nickel to your 12, and, teams run the ball for 3 or 4 plays in a row, and then it gets to 2nd and 7. They're like, we got to pass the ball. And no, you don't, make them stop it. And so I think it's just good discipline by Joe Brady. I also think, watching them play in a little bit, I think their offensive line has just really started to control the line of scrimmage. I don't know if it still holds true after week 2, but I think ever since Joe took over, no one's run the football more than Buffalo when it comes to attempted runs. And I just think that's, one, obviously allowed the offensive line to try to control the game. 2, I think it frees them up in their pass protection too, because when you do that, it forces defensive linemen to play 2-dimensional. You don't allow them to play 1-dimensional. So that's advantage offense. Obviously, it's allowed Josh to become more comfortable in some pockets. So I just think the discipline by Joe of, not getting too cute has been a big deal. And it'll matter. Jacksonville's a good defense. This won't be a cakewalk, in my opinion, for Buffalo offensively. They got good front. They got good backers. Speed. Campbell being out minimizes a little bit. Ryan Nielsen, their defensive coordinator, is really good and really smart. Came from Atlanta last year. It's going to give Josh a bunch of different looks. So it'll present a good challenge.
one of the things we knew this offense was going to look different for Buffalo, but it also, Dan, I got to say, for lack of a better way to put it, it feels different. In 2 games, you had Josh kind of go off. He had 2 throwing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns in week 1, and then you have James Cook 3 touchdowns in the first half. And it feels like Keon Coleman, he had haven't asked him to do anything. Curtis Samuel, we haven't even asked him to do anything. Kincaid was completely taken off the radar by Arizona. They doubled him, they tripled him. They made sure Kincaid didn't beat him, so he hasn't been asked to do much. And you just go down the list of all these weapons, and you feel like
isn't this the beauty? Isn't this the beauty of the offense, though? I don't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. Isn't
that's what I'm asking.
Offense?
Exactly. And that's why it feels weird, because there's really no, they feel like they haven't even shifted into gear, and they're 2-0, and they're
hanging
working
30 on people.
Yeah, they're hanging 30 on people, and they don't even feel like they've put it into gear yet.
The best way I describe it is, again, I've talked about their run game, right? But in relation to the pass game, the defense tells Josh where to throw the ball now. And this isn't a shot at Steph. Like, it was right to go about it the way that they did when they had Steph. That was the right thing to do. But it does free you up to just, okay, this is the play call. And the defense tells me where to throw the football. And maybe I'm not thinking about something a little bit more, and I'm trusting and reacting to things just a little bit more. And you've got all these different guys that you can utilize in a bunch of different ways. And okay, defense, if you here, like, it's always, Tiger Woods was the greatest golfer ever because he could beat people when he had a C game. And, like, can your offense be good on their C player? Can your offense be good, asking your C or D player to be impactful? And that's the beauty of where this offense is the foundation gives it a chance because the offensive line has become so strong. Well, then you have all these pieces, and it's like, well, take away A and take away B and take away C. My D player can be a really, 1 week it might be Dalton, one might be Dawson, one might be Shakir, one might be James. Doesn't mean that their talent is a D player. They're just that C or D option maybe in that play or in that game.
Yeah, well said. Well said, Dan. And look, the Jags have been a little bit of a bugaboo opponent for the Bills. They've lost each of their last 2 games against them. Back in 21, flying high. They lose a game down there under Urban Meyer, 9-6. Could not do anything offensively. And then last year in Tottenham, in London, they get behind. They lose 25-20, and they only average 2.1 yards per carry as that defensive front, which you already mentioned, really stifled them. Now, I want to believe they're a better running team now under Brady than they were at that time, still under Dorsey. But don't think for a second that Bills fans aren't hyper aware of the fact that the Jags have been a little bit of a bugaboo opponent against them.
Yeah, totally. And I think, Josh, I remember that game 2 years ago when Josh did not play well and tried to do way too much and kind of got above his skis a little bit. I think that the balance in this offense is significantly better. The lack of predictability in this offense is significantly better. I think the awareness of who they are is significantly better. So, again, it's going to be a good challenge. I totally believe that. I think that they're more equipped to handle it offensively. This game comes down to me, how consistent this defense can be, because I do think Jacksonville is too talented an offense to kind of stay stuck in the mud. So if this defense kind of continues to play at a above average level, I think Buffalo is good enough on offense to score.
Yeah.
Dan, you should get to the game a little early on Monday. We'll go out. We'll have a few pops and a cigar in the locker room, in the parking lot. It'll be fun.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, that's just what I need is a couple of daddy sodas pregame before doing – last time I was there was the infamous, on TV. So I'm going to try to avoid that one.
All right.
Perfect.
Sounds good, Dan.
Right,
we'll see you up in the broadcast booth. Have a safe travel in here to Western New York.
All right, fellas. Have a great week.